Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. ESPN is reporting the main event of UFC 279 will be Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz in a 5-round welterweight main event. And this kind of comes out of left field. And I know there's been speculation about a potential Chimaev versus Diaz matchup for a few months, but I felt like we were kind of past that. And at this point, I did not think that fight was going to happen. And now all of a sudden, it's not that far away. It's September 10th is UFC 279. We were waiting for a main event, and now we hear Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz will be that main event. I'm going to give you my reaction to this fight because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this potential matchup. And also at the end of this video, I'm going to give you an early prediction for Chimaev versus Diaz. So first off, we all know the Nate Diaz contract situation. Nate Diaz has one fight left on his UFC deal. And for those of you guys who do not know, I've already made a video about the Nate Diaz contract situation. I will link it down in the description. The UFC hates when fighters attempt to fight out their contracts. Usually when you get down to about 2 or 1 fights left on your contract, sometimes even more, depending on who you are, the UFC goes to you and tries to renegotiate your contract because they don't want you going out there and trying to negotiate with other companies. They just want to re-sign you. Nate Diaz has been adamant that he wants to fight out his deal. And the UFC doesn't want that at all. There's been some back and forth. Nate Diaz recently did that interview where he kind of said, I'll fight anyone. I just want out of the UFC. And now all of a sudden, I don't think this is just, by coincidence that all of a sudden now Nate Diaz has a fight against Khamzat Chimaev. This fight as a whole is kind of exciting. It's from a spectacle standpoint. This fight is going to be a massive spectacle. Khamzat Chimaev is a massive name and a very interesting personality. Nate Diaz, a massive name, very interesting personality. But as far as the matchup itself, I'm just not particularly super excited to see this as a main event. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about in this video. I get that Khamzat Chimaev is a massive name. I get that Nate Diaz is a massive name. But when you just take 2 massive names and match them up in a fight, that doesn't necessarily make sense. That doesn't mean it's a main event. I'm telling you guys right now, and I might be in the minority. You guys will have to let me know down in the comments. I think this is a terrible main event. We're getting this as a main event of a pay-per-view. Khamzat Chimaev, Nate Diaz, a main event of a pay-per-view. I'm not happy with it at all. And we're going to get to why I'm not happy with it in a minute. But, I really believe the UFC, what they wanted was they wanted Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. And the reason that did not happen is because Nate Diaz wanted to fight out his contract sooner. He didn't want to wait for Conor McGregor. And also, there's no way the UFC was going to let the last fight on Nate Diaz's contract be Conor McGregor. Because I think what they wanted to do is they were like kind of lingering that Conor McGregor fight out there to try to re-sign Nate Diaz. But Nate Diaz is just being Nate Diaz. He's saying, no, I want to fight out my contract regardless. And what the UFC didn't want is they didn't want Nate Diaz versus Conor. Nate Diaz, that's a very winnable fight for him. I'm not saying he's going to win, but that's a very winnable fight for him. The last thing the UFC would want is Nate Diaz to fight Conor McGregor in the trilogy, potentially beat him, elevate his name even more, because Nate Diaz is already a star regardless of what Dana White and all them want to say. I mean, they know it behind the scenes. They definitely know it. But the last thing they want is Nate to win that fight and then leave the UFC anyway. And even if he does win that fight, he doesn't necessarily get to leave the UFC anyway. Even if he loses this Khamzat fight or wins this Khamzat fight, the UFC has very restrictive contracts. I've talked about this in previous videos, but in case you haven't seen them, even if you fight out your contract, after that, last fight on your contract, let's say Nate versus Khamzat, let's say he goes out there, loses to Khamzat, wins against Khamzat, he still has a few months where the UFC has an exclusive negotiating clause, which means after Nate Diaz, after this fight with Khamzat, and he has no fights left on his deal, he can only negotiate with the UFC for a certain period of time. I think typically it's about 3 months, maybe 6 months. It's different per fighter on different contracts. But even after he fights out his deal, he still has to only negotiate with the UFC. Now, the UFC can waive this right. There's no way they're going to waive this right for Nate Diaz. And then, even after those 3 months, Nate Diaz can then go negotiate with Bellator, PFL, Jake Paul, whoever he wants to negotiate with. After that, the UFC has an exclusive rights to match. So that means if Nate Diaz goes and signs a deal with Jake Paul, with Bellator, with PFL, who knows who he may sign a deal with, the UFC has to see that deal, when he agrees to it, and they can say, okay, we're going to match that deal, and now you're re-signed with us. These contracts are very restrictive of fighters, and it's actually super depressing. If you want to get out of there, there's really no way out. If the UFC doesn't want to let you out, there's really no way out. And I believe that is the reason the UFC made this fight. Because, if you want to get into an early prediction, I am a huge Nate Diaz fan. I am a huge Khamzat Chimaev fan. Nate Diaz is going to get smashed in this fight. This is the worst possible matchup for Nate Diaz, probably in all the UFC. Nate Diaz has had trouble with grapplers at lightweight. And let's dispel a myth. I know Nate Diaz has gotten bigger over the years. Nate Diaz is not a career welterweight, guys. They made up that myth when he fought Conor McGregor at 170, and they pretended like Nate Diaz was a career welterweight and that he was so big, and that's why he choked out Conor McGregor, because he was so massive. Nate Diaz went up to welterweight years ago and got ragdolled by Rory McDonald, and then he went back down to lightweight. What we have in Nate Diaz is a guy who's a lightweight who's just not cutting weight and fighting at welterweight. And granted, maybe he's built some size on over the past couple years of not cutting down weight, but he's still undersized for a lot of these welterweights, And, especially with Khamzat Chimaev, who jumps around between welterweight and middleweight, Khamzat is going to have a massive size advantage. And Khamzat Chimaev is basically a paid hitman in this fight. He is doing the UFC's dirty work. They want him to go out there, smash Nate Diaz, devalue him as much as possible. And then Nate Diaz, okay, you can go somewhere else, or whatever it may be, that Nate Diaz may do, but they're going to devalue his name as much as possible with a loss against Khamzat Chimaev. And I think it's really sad that the UFC gets to a point where they're playing a game of vindictive matchmaking. Dana White did an interview recently where he said, we're talking about Nate Diaz. We're not talking about a world champion like Kamaru Usman or this and that. Well, then why are you booking him against top-ranked welterweights? There's a reason that's happening, and I get Nate Diaz is accepting these fights, but at the same time, if Nate wants out of his contract, I keep seeing people saying, well, Nate's turning down fights, this and that, and if he wanted out, he would be out. The UFC is giving him the least optimal circumstances to be able to get out of his contract because they're not happy with what he's doing. They want him to get smashed against Khamzat Chimaev, and then maybe they could still re-sign him afterwards, but they want him to be devalued as much as possible. And don't be surprised in this fight. I hope this doesn't happen. And by the way, for an early prediction, I think Khamzat Chimaev by first round TKO is probably a safe bet. He is going to maul Nate Diaz. He is much larger. He's an amazing wrestler. Nate Diaz has always had issues with takedown defense. He's kind of covered up some of that with his jiu-jitsu. But against a guy like Khamzat Chimaev, he is going to wreck Nate Diaz. And if Nate Diaz does survive the first round, then we're talking a doctor stoppage in between rounds. That's how bad this fight is going to be. He got taken down and beat up by Benson Henderson on the ground at lightweight. What do you think Khamzat Chimaev is going to do to him? What do you think he's going to do to him? This is a terrible matchup for a main event. And the fact that I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, this is so amazing. I love this main event. I love Nate Diaz. I love Khamzat. They're big names. Give me this as a main event. We should be complaining about this because while this is a spectacle of a fight, this is an uncompetitive fight. There's no chance that Nate Diaz wins. And I believe that if you're saying, oh, Nate Diaz is going to pull it off, it's just typical Nate Diaz, the deck is stacked against him in this one. There is no chance that Nate Diaz pulls this one off, guys. He is going to get smashed. And that's why I think there is a chance, a slight chance. I have a hard time believing that Nate Diaz would do this. But don't be surprised if Nate Diaz goes out there and pulls a Curtis Harper. And that's that boxer from a while ago that went out there, got to the ring. The second the fight started, he just walked off. I could totally see Nate Diaz doing that, tapping out right away or just walking out of the cage saying, I'm done. Pulling a Nick Diaz, telling the ref, I'm done here. I'm done here. And not even fighting Khamzat because he knows this is bullshit. And I'm not just being a Nate Diaz fanboy here. There is no reason. There is a litany of great fights for Nate Diaz in the UFC. We got Tony Ferguson. You could book him against Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, Michael Chandler at welterweight even. And they're booking him against Khamzat Chimaev. And he's saying, oh, he's no Kamaru Usman, but they're booking him against the number 3 ranked welterweight in the world. Absolutely disgusting. And one last thing I have to say about this. And first off, Nate Diaz, when's the last time he's even won a fight? He's on a 2-fight losing streak. The last win he has is against Anthony Pettis. and we're booking him against a number 3 ranked Khamzat Chimaev. This fight makes no sense from a rankings point of view. This fight makes no sense from a competitive point of view. You have Nate Diaz, who hasn't won a fight since 2019 against Anthony Pettis, who's no longer even in the UFC. Before that, his last win was against Conor McGregor. I mean, come on now. That was at UFC 196. He's won 2 fights in 6 years, and we're booking him against Khamzat Chimaev in a main event? I mean, I get it. It's going to sell pay-per-views, but the fact that this is a main event is disgusting to me. I get it. It's going to be a spectacle. The press conferences are going to be fun. This is an uncompetitive fight where one fighter is going to get a one-sided beatdown. That's what's going to happen in this fight. And on top of that, just to rub salt in the wound, another slap in the face. The fact that we're going to have to watch Khamzat Chimaev get a title shot with a win over Nate Diaz. I mean, that's flat out disturbing in my book. I get it. Khamzat, you can already make a case for him. He's undefeated. He's coming off wins against Li Jingliang, wins over Gilbert Burns at UFC 273. That was a solid win over a top, 5 ranked welterweight. But the fact that he's going to get a title shot off of beating Nate Diaz, because he will fight the winner of Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards, it just doesn't sit right with me. I mean, Jorge Masvidal got 2 title shots off a win over Nate Diaz, so I guess it's nothing new. But what they're doing here is I think the UFC is planning on saying goodbye to Nate Diaz, devaluing him as much as possible. Khamzat Chimaev already has a massive name, and a big win over Nate Diaz on a big pay-per-view that a lot of casuals buy just because of the name value, that's going to build his name even more and make that pay-per-view when Khamzat Chimaev fights for the welterweight title even bigger. But, I'm actually really, this is an interesting fight as far as the spectacle point of view, which I've said like a million times in this video. But at the same time, I'm not happy about this, guys. I don't want to see this. This is a one-sided beatdown. And regardless of who this was, I'm a fan of Nate Diaz. It's not just because I'm a fan of him. Regardless of who it was, I do not want to see fights that are not competitive in main events of pay-per-views. I just don't want to see it. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.